give you the exact numbers in a little while coming out, on lumber. So they sell us lumber. They have a tremendous tariff. They make it impossible for us to sell lumber or dairy products into Canada. They'll be met with the exact same tariff unless they drop it. And that's what reciprocal means.
The softwood lumber industry is taking a hit because of significant new duties from the United States.
The industry supports about 100,000 jobs in the province. That's both direct and indirect. Some of our estimates suggest that maybe there could be a 25% reduction in our exports.
Welcome back to the channel. Today we're heading straight into the heart of rural Canada, where towns once kept alive by sawdust and steady paychecks are starting to look like ghost towns. In Maniwaki, Quebec, Domtar's paper mill, once the economic engine of the entire community, has been shut down indefinitely. Overnight, between 80 and 130 workers found themselves out of work this October. Families who thought their livelihoods were secure are now packing boxes, filing for unemployment, and wondering how long they can hold on. Further west in Sault Ste. Marie, nearly a third of the workforce has been cut. The ripple effect is brutal. Diners lose their morning rush, gas stations sit empty, and even local schools struggle to find funding because 70% of the town's revenue once came from lumber. Local leaders are calling it nothing short of an economic disaster. But here's the bigger question. If Canada's lumber towns are collapsing this fast, what does it say about the stability of the country's wider economy? Before we dive in, tap that like button. It tells YouTube this content matters. And the collapse doesn't stop at the factory gates. When a mill closes, the shock waves spread through every corner of daily life, pulling entire communities into free fall. Laid-off workers are no longer just losing paychecks. They're leaving their hometowns behind in search of survival. Families are split, mortgages go unpaid, and the sense of stability that defined small-town Canada evaporates almost overnight. For the businesses that depended on those workers, the picture is just as grim. Diners that once thrived on the morning rush now stand half-empty. Gas stations see fewer cars pull in, and mom-and-pop shops quietly lock their doors for good. One by one, the pillars of local life vanish. Schools and hospitals, which relied heavily on tax revenue from lumber operations, now face painful cuts. Parents are bracing for larger class sizes, while patients wonder how long their clinics can keep the lights on. And beneath it all, a darker mood spreads. Trust in the future is crumbling, replaced by whispers of a total rural recession. The fear isn't just about lumber anymore. It's about whether these towns can survive at all. If you've made it this far, consider subscribing. It's how we keep uncovering what others won't say. But if the human toll shows us the surface damage, the numbers reveal the deeper wound. At its core, the crisis comes down to one brutal fact. The lumber isn't selling. Interfor, one of the biggest players in North America, announced it would cut 145 million board feet of production between September and December, roughly 12% of its total output. The company blamed prolonged weak market conditions, a phrase that barely captures the scale of the downturn. Lumber prices have fallen sharply as Canada's housing market slows under the weight of high interest rates. What was once steady demand for construction materials has dried up, leaving stacks of unsold boards piling higher in warehouses. For the companies, the math is unforgiving. With inventory swelling and orders vanishing, balance sheets are bleeding losses that run into the hundreds of millions. Executives warn of a sector that is effectively paralyzed, unable to maintain production rhythms in the face of collapsing demand. And just when the housing slowdown seemed devastating enough, another blow landed even harder. If high interest rates were the punch, U.S. tariffs became the knife twist. Washington has nearly tripled its anti-dumping duties, pushing them above 35%. For Canadian producers already struggling to stay afloat, that spike was catastrophic. Domtar itself admitted the levy stripped Maniwaki's mill of any ability to compete, turning an already fragile operation into a losing game overnight. What makes it worse is where the damage lands. The United States has always been Canada's biggest lumber market, but with tariffs this steep, Canadian firms lose their advantage on their own doorstep. The result is a forced retreat, where companies either absorb staggering losses or step back entirely from their most critical customer base. Caught in this cycle, the lumber industry finds itself dragged into a trade war it cannot win, squeezed between domestic weakness and international pressure. As the economic fallout deepens, frustration no longer stops at the gates of shuttered mills or the desks of trade negotiators. It is flowing directly toward Ottawa. For many Canadians, the injury cuts beyond paychecks and pensions. It is the gnawing sense that their leaders are absent at the very moment their towns are unraveling, that decisions made in glass towers and international forums bear little resemblance to the reality on the ground. Prime Minister Mark Carney, once seen as a steady hand with international credibility, now faces criticism that he is devoting more energy to long-range climate agreements and high-profile defense procurement than to safeguarding the industries that anchor rural Canada. For communities watching their primary employers vanish, these ambitions feel abstract, almost detached from the emergencies unfolding in real time. The opposition has wasted no time in turning that perception into a political weapon. Conservatives have labeled Carney an out-of-touch globalist, portraying him as a figure who thrives on the prestige of global summits but fails to deliver tangible relief at home. It is a contrast made all the sharper by imagery: polished speeches at Davos and handshakes on the world stage juxtaposed with the silence of factory floors and the hollowing of towns that once pulsed with economic life. In this way, the lumber crisis has swollen into something larger than the fate of a single sector. It has become a metaphor for Canada's vulnerabilities, a warning sign that critical industries can slip away if left exposed. And in the eyes of many, the symbolism is more dangerous than the numbers, a sense that Canada is drifting without direction, unable to secure the balance between its global ambitions and its local foundations. South of the border, the contrast could not be sharper. While Canadian towns wrestle with layoffs, shuttered mills, and boarded-up storefronts, Donald Trump has used the turbulence to reinforce a very different story, one of American dominance and control. On stages across the Midwest, he points to tariffs not as a burden, but as proof of strategic leverage, telling supporters that Washington will collect hundreds of billions of dollars from its rivals. For his audience, it isn't just rhetoric. It is a claim that America can turn global trade into a profit center rather than a vulnerability. The U.S. lumber industry, which has spent decades battling Canadian competition, has quickly aligned itself with this message. For years, American producers have argued that subsidized Canadian exports undermined their competitiveness. Now, with duties raised to unprecedented levels, they insist the playing field is finally balanced. Industry leaders in the South and Pacific Northwest describe the move as long overdue protection, a shield that gives their mills breathing room while demand cools. What Ottawa calls unfair punishment, Washington reframes as structural correction. The impact, however, stretches beyond dollars and cents. In the American narrative, tariffs become a symbol of resilience and bound adaptability. Workers are told they are safeguarded, communities are reassured their industries still matter, and the broader public hears a message of continuity. That when global markets shift, the United States has the ability and the will to reset the terms. This psychological framing, repeated through speeches and media coverage, turns disruption into a source of pride rather than panic. Placed next to Canada's mounting uncertainty, the divide becomes even starker. Ottawa looks reactive, hesitant, and weighed down by internal doubts, while Washington radiates decisiveness. For global investors, policymakers, and even rival governments, the contrast is instructive. America appears willing to absorb short-term strain in exchange for long-term leverage, while Canada risks being cast as the side caught unprepared, forced to play defense in a game its neighbor insists on leading. The lumber collapse is not an isolated story. It's a window into something much larger. What's unfolding in forestry is beginning to echo across other industries, exposing a deeper truth. Canada's economy is sliding. Lumber now joins wine on the growing list of sectors in decline. Exports that once carried the Maple Leaf brand with pride are shrinking, leaving producers to wonder which industry will be next. For rural communities, it feels like the erosion of their economic backbone. For the nation as a whole, it signals fragility in places once thought secure. Investors have noticed. Global capital, always quick to seek stability, is steering clear of Canada, citing uncertainty and weak returns. Instead, those same dollars are being redirected south into U.S. projects that promise growth under a more assertive trade policy. The contrast only sharpens the sense of imbalance. America attracts, while Canada repels. At the root of this decline lies a painful combination: high costs, heavy taxes, and political hesitation. Companies find themselves trapped between expenses they cannot cut and policies that offer little relief. The result is a steady erosion of competitiveness, not just in lumber, but across a wider swath of the economy. And perhaps most damaging of all is the psychological toll. Confidence, once considered Canada's quiet strength, is unraveling. In boardrooms and coffee shops alike, a darker mood has taken hold, one that questions whether the future can be better than the present, or if decline has become the new normal. The story of lumber can no longer be dismissed as just a handful of mills shutting their doors. Each closure is like a brick falling from the foundation of Canada's economy, leaving the structure weaker and more unstable. What began as an industrial setback is now testing the resilience of the nation itself. If Ottawa continues to stand on the sidelines, more industries could follow the same path, collapsing one after another until the pattern becomes undeniable. Around the world, the contrast is being measured. America projects strength, while Canada risks being defined by hesitation. And that raises the unsettling question: will Canada find the will to rebuild, or will lumber prove to be a grim prophecy of a nationwide recession? So what do you think? Are these cracks repairable, or are we watching the beginning of a much larger unraveling? Thanks for watching. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Every click fuels the truth.